widowed millionaire lived without hope until the new nanny arrived and did the unexpected. A young man sat quietly inside a house that once overflowed with laughter, now reduced to nothing but the cries of a newborn child. His name was Daniel Morales, a high school history teacher once loved by his students for his passion and the way he brought stories to life. But ever since his wife, Julia, a devoted nurse, passed away during childbirth, Daniel had not been the same. At only 34, he became a widower, holding in his arms a baby girl he did not know whether to love or to resent. Julia's death had left a deep fracture in his heart, and every time he heard his daughter's cries, it felt like 1,000 needles piercing his chest. The baby's name was Emma. Julia had chosen it herself, hoping their daughter would bring clarity and light into their lives. But to Daniel, that name had become a cruel reminder of fate's irony. Emma looked so much like Julia it hurt. The bright eyes, the delicate features, the fragile innocence that terrified him. The home, once alive with dreams, now felt like a museum of sorrow. The pale yellow walls Julia had chosen so joyfully, the tiny nursery details she had prepared with love. Each corner reminded Daniel of what he had lost, turning warmth into unbearable ache. In his despair, he called Rosa, Julia's mother, a retired schoolteacher. Rosa quickly moved in to care for her granddaughter and to support Daniel, but she knew the truth. The pain inside him was something no one else could heal. Today's story takes us on Daniel's journey, from a desperate father who had lost faith and kept running away, to a man who eventually found himself again in the arms of his daughter Emma. This is not only a story of grief, but also a story of rediscovered hope, of a love that never dies. It simply transforms. Let us walk together into the story of Daniel and Emma, where a man learns what it means to be a father, and a child becomes the very reason her father chooses to live again. On an autumn morning, pale light filtered through the bathroom window. Daniel stood before the mirror, startled by his own disheveled appearance. In the past, he had always been neat, meticulous down to every detail. But now his trembling hands, bloodshot eyes, and visibly thinner face made the reflection before him so unfamiliar that he no longer recognized himself. From the room next door came Emma's faint cries, sharp as needles piercing his heart. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, trying to ignore it, but the sound grew more insistent, forcing him to step out of the bathroom. The house, once spacious and full of light, now resembled a silent tomb. The pale yellow walls Julia had once chosen with such excitement now seemed to mock him. Daniel remembered the day Julia laid a hand on her 6-month belly and said with a radiant smile, "Yellow suits, both boys and girls, Daniel. I want this room to always be full of light." Those words now echoed like an unhealed wound. Emma's little room still kept every detail Julia had prepared: the pristine white crib, the soft cotton sheets, the rocking chair by the window. On the wall hung a pink frame spelling out Emma, in delicate curls, the last hope Julia had left behind. Emma lay in the crib, her small face flushed red from crying. The pale yellow nightgown, her grandmother Rosa's gift, made her seem even more like a living fragment of Julia's memory. Her tiny hands flailed in the air as if reaching for her mother's arms, arms she would never feel again. "Daniel," Rosa's voice called from behind him, gentle but firm. "The baby just needs a diaper change." She had arrived the day before, when Daniel had phoned in desperation, admitting he no longer knew what to do. At 60, Rosa, with her silver hair tied back by an old clip, was still brisk and steady. She had put her own life on hold to care for her granddaughter because she knew Daniel was exhausted in body and spirit. But Daniel didn't turn back. He stood frozen at the doorway, gripping the wooden frame so tightly his knuckles went white. His voice was hoarse. "I can't do it, Rosa. The baby. She's the reason Julia isn't here." Rosa stepped closer, the soft scent of her perfume drifting past him, reminding Daniel of the nights Julia used to spray that very fragrance on her pillow to help her sleep. She placed a hand on her son-in-law's shoulder and spoke slowly. "Julia died of complications, Daniel, not because of Emma. It's not your fault." But Daniel couldn't separate the two. Every time he looked at Emma, he saw Julia's eyes in the body of an infant. She was both a gift and a heavy sentence. Rosa cradled Emma in her arms. The baby's cries slowly subsided, replaced by soft, peaceful breaths. Daniel watched the scene with a mix of relief and shame. Relief at the silence, shame because he, the child's own father, was powerless before her. "You need to eat something and take a shower," Rosa said, still gentle, but now more stern. "You can't go on like this. Tomorrow you have to go back to school. Your students are waiting." Daniel knew she was right. He had taken 2 weeks off after the funeral, but staying in this house, where every corner bore Julia's presence, was slowly killing him inside. He turned to Rosa, his voice rough. "Could you look after Emma for a few more days, just until I regained some balance?" Rosa sighed, her eyes filled with both compassion and resolve. "I can help, Daniel, but Emma needs her father. You can't run away forever." Her words rang in his head like a bell of warning. Running away, that was exactly what he'd been doing. Not running from Emma, but from his own pain. That evening at dinner, seated at the long wooden table that once rang with Julia's laughter, Daniel only stared at the bowl of soup Rosa had prepared. He hardly ate, his spoon merely stirring before being set down. His eyes were heavy, as if he no longer had the strength to keep pretending. At last, he uttered in a hoarse voice, I can't accept it, Rosa. Every time I look at Emma, I only see Julia and the loss." Rosa looked up, silent for a few seconds, then set her spoon down, her eyes glowing with both patience and sorrow. "Daniel, Emma didn't take Julia away. Julia's death was caused by medical complications, something no one could control. The baby is just a child. She has no fault." Daniel gave a hollow laugh, twisted and bitter. "But from the moment Emma was born, Julia was gone. If I hadn't wanted a child, maybe Julia would still be here." "No," Rosa cut him off firmly. "Julia longed for Emma even before she was born. The baby was Julia's dream, not the reason her life was taken. You must not punish Emma for something beyond anyone's will." Daniel fell silent. Rosa's words made sense, but his heart refused to listen. To him, Emma was the direct thread tying him to the loss, the mirror reflecting Julia's face he could no longer touch. The next day, Daniel returned to school. As he entered the teacher's lounge, sympathetic eyes immediately turned toward him. Some offered strained smiles, others nodded gently with whispered condolences. But to Daniel, all of it only made him feel more exposed and weaker than ever. In the classroom, he stood before the blackboard, chalk in hand, but his mind was blank. The history stories that once thrilled him were now nothing but lifeless words. Students sat quietly, watching their teacher, waiting, while Daniel felt as though he were playing the role of a stranger in his own life. At lunchtime, the principal, Mr. Alvarez, called Daniel into his office. The spacious room, lined with books and awards, had become a chamber of heavy silence. "Daniel, my son, I know this loss is enormous," he said, his voice warm and low. "You've just lost your wife. You have a newborn. Are you sure you're ready to come back?" Daniel answered quickly, almost defensively. "I need the job. Julia always said work helps me keep balance. She wouldn't want me sitting at home doing nothing." The principal studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but I hope you don't push yourself too far. If needed, give yourself time." Daniel nodded, but inside he felt only a deep heaviness. He knew he wasn't ready, but at least at school he could escape. Because there was no Emma's crying, no yellow walls reminding him of Julia. Yet it was precisely that escape that dug the wound deeper. For no matter where he went, Emma still existed, waiting for him at home. And every time he heard her cries over the phone, Daniel felt like both a victim and a fugitive, running away from the greatest responsibility of his life. That night, Daniel returned home after a long day at school. The light in the living room cast a pale yellow glow, but instead of warmth, it filled him with emptiness. Rosa had gone to bed early, leaving a note on the table. Emma has been fed and has been asleep for a while. If she wakes up, try to hold her a little. Daniel picked up the note and sighed. He wasn't sure if he had the courage to do that. To him, Emma was still a fear wrapped in the form of a baby. Not long after, the familiar cry rang out from the nursery. At first faint, it quickly turned into urgent sobs. Daniel approached the door, his heart pounding. He stood there for a few seconds, hesitating as if behind that door lay an abyss. Finally, he pushed it open. Emma lay in the crib, her face flushed red, her tiny hands flailing as if searching for something. Daniel bent down and slowly lifted her up. The small body trembled in his arms, and the crying did not stop. "I'm sorry, Daddy doesn't know what to do," he whispered, his voice breaking. He tried rocking her gently, pacing back and forth across the room, but Emma only cried louder. In a moment of despair, a melody drifted through his mind, the lullaby Julia used to hum during her pregnancy. Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing, his voice hoarse and trembling. "Sleep well, little one. Tonight the moon shines bright." A miracle happened. The cries slowed, then ceased altogether. Emma opened her eyes wide, gazing straight at her father's face, as if listening to each fragile note. Daniel felt his heart clench, not with the sharp sting of grief this time, but with a fragile thread of connection he never thought possible. He kept singing, each word shaky yet full of sincerity. In that moment, Daniel realized Emma was not just a reflection of Julia, but a living being who needed him. When Emma drifted to sleep in his arms, Daniel remained still, afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile moment. For the first time since Julia's death, he allowed himself to weep, not out of despair, but because a small flame of hope had been lit. Days later, just as Daniel was struggling to fix his tie one morning, the doorbell rang, an interruption that would change his life in ways he could not yet imagine. He frowned, walked down the stairs, and before he could wonder who it was, he saw Rosa standing at the door. Beside her was a young woman, slender, with brown hair neatly tied back into a ponytail. "Daniel," Rosa said in a calm but firm voice, "this is Sophie Turner. She's here to interview for the nanny position." Daniel froze for a moment, unable to believe his ears. He glanced at Rosa, his eyes full of protest. "What have you done? Who told you to bring a stranger into this house?" Sophie offered a gentle smile and extended her hand. "Good morning, Mr. Morales. I graduated in early childhood education and have 6 years of experience caring for infants and young children. I understand this is a special circumstance, and I'd like to help." Daniel shook her hand briefly, his heart heavy with discomfort. The thought of letting a stranger into this house to touch his daughter tightened his chest. Rosa sighed and intervened. "Daniel, you need to go back to teaching. I can't stay here forever. Emma needs consistent, professional care." Daniel remained silent. He wanted to object, but reason told him his mother-in-law was right. He turned to Sophie, his voice dry. "So, what do you think you can do for Emma?" Sophie didn't rush to answer. She tilted her head, listening to a faint sound coming from the nursery. Then she asked, "Is that Emma? Did she just wake up?" Daniel was caught off guard. Indeed, Emma had just stirred, letting out a small whimper. He nodded. "May I see her?" Sophie asked warmly. Daniel hesitated, but Rosa led the way. Inside the nursery, Emma squirmed in her crib, her face scrunching as if about to cry. Daniel quickly interjected, She usually cries when she meets strangers. I think—" Before he could finish, Sophie had already leaned down and picked Emma up with confident, practiced movements, holding her properly. She whispered, "Hello, Emma. You're such a sweet girl." What surprised Daniel was that Emma didn't cry. The baby opened her wide eyes, staring at the unfamiliar face as if listening to the soothing voice. Sophie looked up, her gaze sincere. "I'm not here to replace Emma's mother. I just want to make sure she receives the best care and to give you time to find your balance again." Daniel stood still, a strange feeling rising within him. He felt relieved that Emma was calm in Sophie's arms, yet at the same time jealous, as though Emma's first bond wasn't with him. Rosa placed a hand on her son-in-law's shoulder. "Give Sophie a chance, Daniel. She knows what she's doing." "Beep up." Daniel pressed his lips together and gave a reluctant nod. He knew his life had just reached a turning point, and he wasn't sure he was ready to accept it. In the first days with Sophie in the house, Daniel almost avoided her completely. He left early for school, returned late, always using work as an excuse. But no matter how hard he tried to escape, every night he still heard Sophie's soft laughter as she lulled Emma to sleep, or the baby's babbling in response. The house that had once been silent now carried new sounds, which to Daniel were both a comfort and a sting in his heart. One weekend afternoon, Rosa firmly pushed Daniel into the nursery. Emma was lying on a playmat, Sophie sitting beside her with a gentle smile. "Daniel, it's time you learned," Rosa said. "You can't let someone else do everything for you." Daniel hesitated, glancing at Sophie and then at Emma. "But what if I do it wrong?" Sophie answered calmly. "All fathers start from zero. No one knows how to be a dad from the beginning. Just try." She handed Daniel a clean diaper. Emma began to stir, her eyes wide open. Daniel took a deep breath and clumsily undid the tiny buttons of her outfit. His hands trembled as though he were handling something so fragile it might shatter at the slightest touch. "Slowly," Sophie guided. "Put your hand under her back. Don't lift too high. That's it. Now wipe clean and place the new diaper." Daniel followed her instructions, each movement tense yet careful. Emma hiccuped once and then, unexpectedly, smiled, or perhaps it was only a reflex. But the moment made Daniel's heart skip. He whispered, "Did she just smile?" "Maybe," Sophie replied with a soft laugh. "Whether it's real or just reflex, she just gave you something." That night, when Daniel held Emma, he tried singing again. This time, it wasn't as awkward as before. His voice was still hoarse, but steadier. Emma nestled her head into her father's shoulder, her cries fading until she drifted into sleep. Rosa stood in the doorway, her eyes glistening. "See, Daniel? You can do it." Day by day, Sophie taught Daniel how to distinguish between cries, hunger, a wet diaper, sleepiness, or simply wanting to be held. At first, Daniel often mixed them up, but gradually he began to notice the differences. Each time he guessed right, Emma calmed down faster, and a little spark of confidence grew inside him. One day, Sophie suggested, "Would you like to try bathing Emma? I'll be right here beside you." Daniel worried. "What if she slips from my hands?" "You won't let that happen. I'll help you." They prepared a basin of warm water. Daniel held Emma, and at first she cried out sharply when she touched the water. But then Daniel began to sing, his voice wavering amidst the steam. Emma grew quiet, her tiny hands splashing in the water as if discovering a whole new world. Daniel laughed, a sound he thought he had lost long ago. After wrapping Emma in a soft towel, he looked at her little face pressed against his chest and whispered, "You look so much like your mother, but there's something of me in you too." Sophie watched silently, her gaze tender. She knew this moment was a turning point. Daniel was beginning to see Emma not just as Julia's reflection, but as a piece of his own flesh and blood. That night, for the first time, Daniel woke up on his own when he heard Emma cry, without Rosa or Sophie calling him. He picked her up himself, prepared a bottle, and sat in the rocking chair. In the dim light, he watched Emma drink, her eyelids slowly closing. A strange feeling spread through him, not fear anymore, but a small, steady peace. Daniel realized perhaps he didn't yet know how to love Emma enough, but he was learning. And Emma herself, with every look and every cry, was teaching him how to be a father. Although the past days had brought many changes, inside Daniel there still remained an invisible wall: guilt. Every time Emma smiled, every time he felt happiness with her, a voice echoed in his head. If Julia were still alive, would I have the right to enjoy this joy? One evening, after Sophie had gone home, Rosa sat down beside Daniel in the living room. Emma was fast asleep in her crib. Rosa looked at her son-in-law for a long while before softly saying, "Daniel, do you know why I've stayed this long?" Daniel nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Because I can't do anything, and Emma needs someone to take care of her." "Not only that," Rosa shook her head. "I was once exactly like you. When Elena, Julia's mother, died young, I blamed myself too. I was afraid to love Julia, thinking that if I grew too attached, losing her one day would hurt even more. I left her in the care of others. But then one night, Julia developed a high fever, and the doctor said she might not make it. That was when I realized, even if you keep your distance, pain will still find you. The only difference is, you'll have missed all the moments of love before it." Daniel fell silent. Rosa's words pierced through the wall he had built. He knew she was right, but his heart still trembled with fear. The next day in class, Daniel was caught off guard when a girl raised her hand and asked, "Teacher, do you have a child?" The innocent question made the whole class burst out laughing. Daniel froze. In that instant, he almost wanted to say no. But then Emma's image appeared in his mind, her wide eyes, her tiny hand clutching his finger. "Yes," he replied softly. "I have a little girl." The class gasped in surprise. Daniel gave a faint smile, but inside he realized he had just publicly acknowledged Emma as part of his life. A small step, but the first one toward overcoming guilt. That evening, holding Emma in his arms, Daniel whispered, "I'm sorry for ever blaming you. None of this is your fault. You are the gift your mother left for me." Emma didn't understand, only nuzzled her head against his chest. But for Daniel, those words felt like a release. More and more small moments began to ease his heart. The first time Emma reached out to touch his cheek. The time she babbled as if trying to say, "Daddy." The moment Daniel realized her smile wasn't only Julia's, but carried a hint of his own. One evening, Sophie shared her story. "When I was 8, my mother died. My father was lost. He avoided me at first, afraid he wouldn't be good enough. But then he realized I needed him more than anyone else. From then on, we became inseparable, like companions. I think Emma needs that from you too." Daniel sat quietly. Sophie's story reflected his own fear, but also opened a path. If another father had overcome it, then so could he. That night, as he placed Emma in her crib, Daniel looked at her peaceful sleeping face and whispered, "I promise I won't miss these moments anymore. You are not the reason your mother is gone. You are the reason I keep living." In the quiet room, for the first time in many months, Daniel felt truly at peace. From the day Daniel began facing himself, life in the small house slowly changed. He no longer buried himself in work to the point of exhaustion. Instead, he reorganized his time, leaving school earlier, having dinner at home with Rosa and Sophie, and most importantly, spending moments with Emma. One morning, instead of hastily tying his tie to make it to class on time, Daniel stepped into the nursery and saw Emma lying on her back, playing. She kicked and waved her arms, her eyes sparkling as she gazed at the colorful mobile above her crib. Daniel sat down on the rug and laid Emma beside him. "Good morning, little princess," he whispered. Emma answered with a coo, then suddenly rolled to her side, trying to turn over. Daniel held his breath. Within seconds, Emma managed to flip onto her stomach, her eyes wide, as if she herself were surprised at what she had just done. Daniel burst into laughter, tears welling in his eyes. "You did it! My Emma just rolled over!" He quickly called for Rosa and Sophie. The three of them clapped, while Emma cooed again, her face bright as though she were sharing in their joy. For Daniel, that moment was more precious than any lecture at school, more valuable than all the long hours of work he once pursued. He realized that every small milestone of Emma's was the greatest reward life could give. As winter passed, the house once heavy with memories was now filled with new sounds. Laughter, Daniel's soft singing, Sophie's conversations with Emma, and the peaceful silence when Emma slept in her father's arms. One evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sophie stayed behind in the living room. "You've changed a lot, Daniel," she said softly. "Before you were like a cold wall, but now, whenever Emma sees you, she lights up." Daniel was quiet for a moment before replying. "I used to think work would save me, but it turns out Emma is the one keeping me here. Every time I look at her, I feel Julia is still somewhere close, and I find myself again." Rosa, who overheard, smiled. "That's right. Julia gave you a reason to go on. Never forget that." After more than 3 months of staying, Rosa decided to return to her own home. At their last meal together, she held Daniel's hand. "You've changed. Now I can be at peace. Emma truly has a father." Daniel choked up. "Thank you for being here when I was at my weakest." When Rosa left, the house might have seemed emptier, but in truth, it was full of life. Daniel took on more duties, bathing Emma, changing her diapers, telling her stories. At first clumsy, but with every small success, he felt as if he had conquered a mountain. One evening, Daniel came home early from school. He saw Sophie trying to soothe Emma, who was fussy and crying. Daniel walked over, took his daughter in his arms, and began to sing softly. Emma gradually quieted, her eyes growing heavy. Sophie looked at him in surprise, then smiled. "See? Now Emma knows who her true anchor is." In that moment, Daniel felt a new kind of confidence, not just responsibility, but joy and pride. He began to look forward to coming home, no longer seeing work as a place to hide. Little by little, Daniel stopped leaving for school at dawn. He arranged with the principal to have some mornings off, teaching only in the afternoons. Those mornings became precious. He fed Emma her bottle, changed her diapers, laid her on the mat to play. Every smile, every touch, every babble that sounded like conversation felt like he was stepping into a whole new world, the world of father and daughter. Sophie often watched from afar, her eyes warm. She knew no more advice was needed. Daniel was truly beginning to live as a father. The next day, Daniel took Emma to the cemetery where Julia rested. Carrying his daughter, he walked to the simple headstone as the wind whispered through the trees. "Hello, my love," Daniel murmured to Julia. "I brought Emma to see you. Yesterday, she called me Dad for the first time." He broke down in tears, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were of release. He lifted Emma, letting her touch the cold stone. "Do you see? Our child grows a little more every day. I promise. I will raise her, love her with everything I have. I will take care of her for both of us." Emma babbled softly, her bright eyes glancing around as if sensing something. Daniel kissed her forehead, then lifted his gaze to the pale gray sky. In that moment, Julia was no longer only pain, but a gentle presence guiding him forward. The wound healed, not because the loss vanished, but because love had found a way to live on. Smiling through tears, Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Julia. Thank you for leaving Emma with me. We will live a full life, and you will always be part of it. But along with these changes, Daniel also began to notice Sophie more. She wasn't just a nanny. From the day she entered this house, Sophie had become a quiet pillar, patiently guiding Daniel through each small gesture, gently reassuring him whenever he felt anxious, and most importantly, always placing Emma at the very center of her love. One evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, Daniel stepped into the living room and saw Sophie sitting at the desk, writing in Emma's care journal. The lamp cast its light over her face, tired yet warm. Suddenly, Daniel said, "Sophie, I've never really thanked you." She looked up and smiled softly. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing my job." "No," Daniel shook his head. "You've done much more than that. You were here when I couldn't bring myself to be with Emma. You helped me believe I could be a father. His voice caught. "I owe you so much." Sophie was silent for a long moment before she gently replied, "Daniel, I didn't do this because you owe me anything. I did it because I knew Emma needed her father, and you deserved that role. I only helped you see what Julia must have already believed in all along." Their eyes met, a silence filled with meaning. Daniel felt his heart stir with a strange rhythm, a feeling long dormant. In the days that followed, they shared more. Daniel told Sophie about the first time he met Julia, about the dream he and his wife once had of taking their daughter to the sea. Sophie shared about her childhood without a mother, and how her father had learned to become the anchor for his only daughter. Their stories, though different, shared a common thread: love and loss. One afternoon, while Emma was practicing sitting up, Sophie sat on the floor beside Daniel. Emma reached out, laughing gleefully, and Sophie laughed along, her face glowing in the sunlight. Daniel watched the scene and realized this image gave him a peace he thought he would never find again. He wasn't in a hurry. His heart still held a place for Julia, but now a new space had opened, a place for hope and for another beginning. That night, as he walked Sophie to the door, Daniel hesitated and then spoke softly. "Sophie, I don't know what the future will hold, but one thing is certain. Your presence has changed the lives of both Emma and me, and I truly cherish that." Sophie nodded gently, her eyes shining with emotion. No distant promises were needed, but in that moment, they both knew a tender, steady affection was quietly taking root. That spring, Emma turned 1 year old. The small house that had once been heavy with grief had now completely transformed. Silence was replaced by pure laughter, the sound of tiny footsteps learning to walk, and the gentle conversations between Daniel and Sophie. On Emma's first birthday, Rosa arrived early, bringing with her a small cake she had baked herself. A candle flickered on top. Daniel held Emma in his arms at the table, while Sophie stood beside them, clapping along. "Make a wish, little princess," Daniel whispered, then blew out the candle together with his daughter. The room erupted in applause, and in that moment, Daniel felt a simple yet profound happiness, something he once thought he would never have the chance to touch again. After the small celebration, Daniel took Emma out into the garden. Cherry blossom petals drifted down around father and daughter. He sat on the grass, letting Emma toddle across the soft ground. Sophie came out, her eyes gently following them. "I never thought I would stay this long," Sophie said with a soft smile. Daniel looked at her, his voice sincere. "Neither did I, but now I can't imagine life for the two of us without you." For a while, they were silent. Emma plopped down on the grass, clapping her hands in delight as a butterfly fluttered past. Daniel and Sophie both laughed, and in that laughter there was no longer any distance between them. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Daniel pulled out a small notebook, Julia's journal from her final months of pregnancy. He turned the pages, reading lines filled with love. "Emma will bring light to our family." Daniel closed the notebook, his eyes glistening with tears. He turned to Sophie, who was tidying Emma's toys, and softly said, "Julia believed that, and now I understand. And Emma truly is the light. And you've helped me see it." Sophie froze, her eyes moist but shining. Daniel stepped closer, not rushing, and simply placed a warm hand on her shoulder. In his eyes there was not only sorrow that had healed, but also hope for a new journey, a journey with Emma at the center and Sophie holding an important place. Outside, the moon shone down on the house. No longer a home haunted by loss, it was now a place where a family was being rebuilt, slowly but surely. That night, before going to bed, Daniel kissed Emma lightly on the forehead and whispered, "You saved me, Emma. You gave me a reason to live, to love, and to hope again." Emma stirred, her lips curving into a drowsy smile. Daniel smiled back. He knew the painful journey had closed, and a new one, full of love, faith, and light, had begun.